What do you think about the idea of adding text to your crochet work? I don't particularly like crocheting or knitting letters, but I like the idea of putting little messages in clothing. And I want to put a really long message in my next piece. If I want the text to be legible, I'll need a few rows per line of text to be able to make well-formed letters. So it'll take up a lot of space. But there is a more efficient way of putting long messages into fibers, and that's with code. The idea of slipping coded messages into fibers isn't new. Back in times of war, knitting was used to carry messages by disguising them as a scarf or hat. This could be done by using different stitches to represent the dots and dashes of Morse code. And these messages were only obvious to someone who was looking for them. I'm not sure exactly how it was done because I didn't look into it very deeply. If you know, please enlighten me in the comments section. But here is a little sample of how I think encoding messages with different stitches would have looked if it were just done using different stitches. Dots are the single knits, dashes are the double knits, and spaces between the letters are 2 purls. This is 4 rows long, so it's nice and clear. If it's just one row like the one below, it isn't as easy to read. I wanted to make something that could be easily read at a glance, provided you could identify that there was Morse code there and were able to decode it. So to make it very visible, I wasn't going to use different types of stitches. Instead, I would use stitches that were all the same, but different colors. I didn't want to use as many stitches as letter shapes would require, or that knitting attempt I did. So to make this pattern, I'd start with some text. I would remove all hard returns to get a continuous line of text, and remove things that can't be converted to Morse code. Then just convert what was left to Morse code. So this text would become a series of dots and dashes, separated by spaces. At this point, there's more than one way to convert this to a pattern. I'm sure you can think of many different ways to do this. But I'm just representing dots with one color of yarn, dashes with a second color, and spaces with a third color. If you have just a short message, this is a quick and simple task, and you can probably just look at the Morse code and knit or crochet it in without any extra hassle. The message I wanted to crochet was very long, and I didn't want to go through each dot and dash, jotting down the pattern, especially since it's not always immediately clear how many spaces are between the dots and dashes. There is 1 space between each letter and 2 between each word. For me, it's hard to see. If this were being communicated in actual Morse code, the spaces would be represented by pauses of different lengths. So to make the pattern making easier, I asked my son to write me some code that would convert Morse code into a grid. I wanted this code to create a colored grid where dots were represented as blue squares, dashes as green squares, and spaces as gray squares, because those are the colors of yarn I plan to use. I also asked him to write it so that there would be 50 squares in each row. And he made it. It currently cannot process more than 4,000 stitches at a time. I would have to break it up into sections before inserting it into this program, but a completely full grid will fit nicely on an A4 sheet. I'm short-sighted, so this is fine for me. I went in there with my beginner programming skills and added a bit more code that enabled text to be entered as input instead of Morse code, which could then generate the grid. It also outputs Morse code, just in case that's useful. Why not? I asked my son if I could hand this code out, and he's agreed, but I think we need to make it a bit more user-friendly first. Once it's ready, I'll put a link to it in the description. Something I think is important to consider before starting a project like this is how many stitches it will be made up of, or how big it's going to be. A character in Morse code can be anything from 1 to 7 characters in length. On top of that, there are the spaces between the letter codes and words. It's handy to know how many stitches your message will take up in Morse code, and you can figure this out by just sticking the Morse code in a word processor, highlighting the code, going to the Review drop-down menu, and clicking on Word Count. Look at the characters including spaces. There it will tell you how many characters there are or how many stitches you will need to make. So if you were to make a simple beanie like this one, I have 11 rows of 60 double crochet stitches, plus a few more rows with fewer stitches. This gives me 780 stitches to work my code into. So you really need to keep in mind how big the thing is that you're going to make and whether or not it's going to fit your message. Now I'll just demonstrate how this program is used from start to finish. I have this text here. It's 445 characters long with spaces. I paste it into the program, and as Morse code, it's 1414 characters with spaces and looks like this. But I don't really need that. I want the grid, which is right here. In the folder where the Python file is, there is an EPS file called pattern image. I can open it with GIMP and save it as a bitmap file and then print it out. Originally, I wanted to put the poem If by Rudyard Kipling into this beanie, but that translated into 4,630 something stitches, which is too many stitches for my beanie. So I encoded a shorter poem in this beanie. Conversely, if you wanted your code to take up even more stitches than Morse code, which you might want to do if you're working on a bigger piece and want the message to fill the whole thing, maybe you could convert it to binary instead. You'd need only 2 colors then. Or you could layer codes upon codes. Maybe it could turn into a fun decoding puzzle for your cryptographer friend. The poem I finally settled on was Invictus by William Ernest Henley. It's a good length for a beanie and I really like the message. And the pattern for it looks like this. I will be doing 110 stitches per row. This poem is 1,691 characters long, so the message will take up just over 15 rows. I divided the grid up into chunks to make it easier to track where I was. As I'm sure you've already anticipated, this project involves a lot of color changes. If you're not comfortable with color changing, you will be by the time you finish something like this. Initially, I wanted to hide the carried yarn in the stitches. This is definitely something you could do, but it didn't look good with this yarn. So instead I carried it on the back of the work. This makes a bit of a stringy mess, but I'll be adding a lining to this to cover it all up, and that should also add extra insulation, which is much needed since this is cotton yarn. If you're worried about your different colors of yarn getting tangled and having to spend half your time untangling them, there is a way to do this without tangling your yarn at all. I kept the grey yarn on the left, blue in the middle, and green on the right. Whenever I wanted to do a grey stitch, I made sure I passed the yarn under all the other colors. For blue, the yarn would always go above the grey and under the green. And for green, I would always make sure it was above the other yarn colors. This way the yarns never get tangled and the whole thing goes nice and smoothly. Here is the whole poem in beanie form. I added a personalized message in there as well, and added some ribbing at the bottom. Before I added the lining, I thought I would show you what the inside looks like, because you know it's going to look a mess. Here it is without the lining, and here it is with the lining. I reckon a pattern like this can make a special gift. This beanie is a gift for my son, the same one who wrote the code.